My name is Zach Zan. I'm an editor at Worn and Wound. Thank you all so much for coming to the Windup Watch Fair in New York City. It's been a great show. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful time. Are you having a good time? All right.
I am.
Fantastic. Yeah. I know you guys are having a good time because your booths have been swamped for the entire duration of the show.
I feel very sorry for my team. They've got no one there.
Yeah, they're struggling up there right now. We'll get you back up there eventually. This panel is called Shepherding Heritage Brands, and we're joined by three watch industry veterans this afternoon who I think each have a unique perspective on heritage brands because each of their brands are quite different in how they approach heritage, and the history of the brands are different. And so we'll definitely get into that, and I want them to introduce themselves and introduce their brands to you right now. So why don't we start down the other end of the stage with Mike. Introduce yourself and a little bit about your brand and how you guys view heritage. And also, why don't you tell us what you're wearing on your wrist, because they've been doing that at these panels. Because we're watch nerds, we want to know what you're wearing.
Absolutely. So hello everybody. My name is Michael Pearson. I'm the global brand director for Zodiac watches. Been in the industry far too long, but still quite new to Zodiac. And the reason why I joined was because of its heritage. It was a story that for the longest time meant so much to so many, not just in the watch world, but it was also a watch that was sold through, especially the American military, through Vietnam, through Korea. It was sold in the PX. It is still sold in the PX today. And it was something that was really wonderful. But for 20 or 30 years, maybe even more, I wouldn't say it was mistreated, but it was definitely not to the heights of what it once was. And so when I was tasked at maybe bringing it back or helping this team bring it to the front, it felt like something that was really exciting for a watch person to do. But also, if we do this right, we've got that 140 years of history that, not like it was for nothing, but you get a chance to kind of retell that 140 years, respect it, and then push it forward to the next part as well. This watch is completely not about heritage. I'm wearing our Pro Diver Watermelon. We do these wonderful watches that look like the past. But for this Pro Diver, this was the best of us. We got a chance to make a watch which could go deeper than anything before us. And also we have some fun with color. We've always done color, but this was obviously to the extreme as well, and it's all sold out now. But that's what I'm wearing today.
Great. RT, tell us a little bit about Vortic and what you're wearing and how your brand kind of fits into this heritage discussion, because it's kind of a unique story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So my name is RT Custer. I'm the CEO of Vortic Watch Company out of Fort Collins, Colorado. And we salvage and restore antique American pocket watches and turn them into wristwatches. We like to say we preserve American history one watch at a time. I'm wearing our military edition that comes out on Veterans Day each year, November 11th. And this pocket watch was called the Master Navigator's Watch. And this pocket watch was flown on the B bombers like the B-17s and B-29s during World War II. And so the word heritage is just part of everything that we do. We're also, as a brand, we make one new one-of-a-kind watch every day using all those old pocket watches. And then we can take family heirlooms. If you have, grandfather's, great-grandfather's pocket watch, we can turn it into a wristwatch as a service. We call that Convert Your Watch. And we actually internally call that the heritage process. So I think that's why I'm here, besides being invited. Thank you so much for
that. That is why you're here, yes.
And just happy to be here and talk about the heritage of the great American watch companies like Hamilton, Elgin, Waltham, Illinois. Yeah, goes on and on.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, RT. We appreciate it. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion, working this, like the actual vintage watches, into the conversation. We're excited to get into that. Before we do, Don, why don't you introduce yourself and your brand?
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Don Cochran. I am the owner and CEO of Vertex Watch Company. Vertex was founded by my great-grandfather in 1912. It's most famous for now being one of the dirty dozen watch manufacturers that made watches for the British during the Second World War. Other brands include Omega, IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Longines. So it's a nice club to be a part of. It was then taken over by my grandfather before it closed in the 70s due to the quartz crisis. Then about 7 years ago, my grandmother died, and I was sitting at work feeling very sad about that. And I suddenly realized it's a good way to keep her in my life is to restart her father's watch company. And here I am today with that. So we make a series of watches very much based around our heritage, but not owned by our heritage. So the M100, which is based on the WW watches from the Second World War. And then the MP45, which again is a Second World War watch, and what I'm wearing today is the M60, which is a very technical dive watch, slightly based on the dive watch made in the 50s, but really sort of much more modern.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think it's worth pointing out that, the reason we're talking about heritage, watches at all is because, heritage watches are a key to the industry. I think if anyone has been involved in watch collecting for any part of the last 10 years, you know that, brands are constantly reaching back to the past to, present new products and to introduce new people to the hobby. And it's almost kind of an anachronistic thing, reaching back to the past while also, growing the hobby with new, new collectors and new enthusiasts. So, hopefully we can kind of get into, why that is, like what happens in the watch industry that makes that unique. I'm wondering if we could start the conversation just by talking about what responsibility each of you feel to the brand, or in our team, in your case, to the actual watches themselves. What responsibility you have to that heritage to kind of, keep it moving forward and to pay respect to it. You want to start?
Sure. I joined the brand basically not knowing too much of the history, and I think speaking to a lot of the customers that come to Windup, or you speak to people in the stores, everyone's got their 1 or 2 or 3 points of what they think they know about Zodiac. And they dive watches, yes, this, that, and the other. But for me, it was also a little bit confusing with we're owned by the Fossil Group. And I, being in the industry as long as I am, or have been, you can look at it and say, oh, it's a fashion brand. But what they own is obviously all fashion, apart from Zodiac. And the thing that got me is when you were speaking to the founder of Fossil, he looked at himself and Fossil as custodians to this name. And that just resonated with me massively. This company has done far too many important things to just be known as owned by Fossil. But what I did see within that company, or within that first conversation, is that they invested not just time and money, but also their reputations to make sure that this brand could be the best of the group. And I think that was very, very much in keeping with what the Kalam family, who owned it for 100 years, what they wanted. Build their own calibers, make watches interesting, have fun with color, and also do it at a price point that was accessible for everybody. Now, quartz crises destroyed a lot of brands, and Zodiac never went out of business, but it was represented and owned by a couple of the companies who maybe didn't know what they had on their hands. And I do think that our ownership group, maybe at the beginning, were not building the same type of quality watches that we build today. But when you have this name, you have a responsibility to retell those stories, to really look to the past. And for a century, not only did it do watches or make watches for military, but they made bloody lovely watches for the watch buying public, not just dive watches, but beautiful watches with interesting complications. And so that needs to be redone and retold. And I found out a fact a few months ago that in the 70s we were making 250,000 watches. Last year we made and sold 6,000 watches. And we're owned by this huge company that does all of the watches that you know, but this is really a startup. But if we do it right, and I think, like I said, for 30 years it wasn't maybe doing it right, we get a chance to give it a boost up for the next part. But it's an impressive story, but we just need to tell it more, which is why Worn and Wound and Windup and the retailers and my big mouth, why it's important to keep telling that story that way. But every single person that I've met in by the desk today, all of them go literally within 5 minutes, okay, I get it. I've been with brands in the past where you'd have to convince them about the history that might be quite new. And it is genuine. It might not be old, but it is genuinely a story. But with this one, it's important and it meant something. And I think it should mean something again.
Yeah. It's, I like that you pointed out, rightly, that you're part of the Fossil company. And it's, it's interesting to consider how that works into the like the heritage storytelling process. You don't necessarily think of a modern large company like Fossil that has its hands in so many different things would necessarily think yeah, I'm going to pay attention to the history of this little, watch brand that we, acquired. So, things could have gone very differently. It's
Very much
fortunate
so.
that Fossil is able to pour resources into telling that story.
But to a point. So Fossil is the fourth biggest watch house in the world. It might not be the watches that most of us would buy at this type of event, but goes to the gentleman who owns Fossil. He goes, well, Fossil could be your first watch because it's inexpensive. It might also be your last watch because your grandkids buy you something for Christmas. But in between, you get to choose what story represents you. This should be the best of us. And I said this to a gentleman recently. I said, Breguet or Omega are owned by Swatch. We all go down to Times Square to find that moon swatch, but it is still fashion and it is still at a price point that's accessible. We just within the Fossil group have this one chance and this one brand that can do things right. And I think it could also elevate that group as well with quality and understanding how we do materials.
Yep, great. So Don, your brand is not owned by a large corporation. It's a very different family-owned brand. So how does that kind of change the equation in terms of thinking about the responsibility of kind of honoring the heritage of your brand?
Yeah, I mean, heritage for me and for Vertex means two things, really. First of all, like I mentioned or touched on earlier, heritage was I brought back Vertex back to keep my grandmother and her legacy in my life. So part of my duty is to honor that legacy and to do what she would have wanted to and her father would have wanted to happen to the company and sort of honor that. At the same time, we kicked off with a very important watch. The WW watches were worn by soldiers that fought about the beaches in Normandy and went on to liberate Europe and Asia, and we have to honor their legacy too and their heritage and that sort of thing. So integrity and that narrative are at the core of our business. We are an independent watch company, so we are limited to what we can do, but what we do the very best that we can. So everything has to be as good as it can be, and we've got a really, really wonderful collection of very loyal customers that really get it, and we look after them and they look after us, and that's kind of how it works.
That's great. And RT, so obviously your brand's a little bit different. How do you feel this idea of like responsibility to the past applies to you? I know that you take watch history and the history of these brands and what the watches were used for very seriously. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. We refer to a Vortic watch as a museum on the wrist. Everything between the glass is about 100 years old. And that's the responsibility that we have as a brand, is to preserve those pieces of history. And the way we take responsibility for that is, we also like to say we're not watchmakers, we're engineers. And so we designed this case to protect and preserve this piece of history so that it can be an heirloom for hundreds of years in the future for our current customers, just like it was as a pocket watch the last 100 years.
Yeah. And when a customer sends in a watch that they want converted into a watch that can be worn on the wrist, you preserve the case materials and anything else that's not used in the wristwatch. Is that right?
Yeah. So we call it a non-destructive conversion. So everything we do is totally reversible. You can take it back and turn it into a pocket watch again. And again, to me, I think that's part of the respect for our ancestors that made these, and what they would have wanted is, let's make this usable every day again, and let's protect it and make sure that people can respect it and look at it every day, and then also as an heirloom we keep all of the the original case. We actually, a lot of times, if those gold cases had engravings on them, you showed me a pocket watch earlier with an engraving on it, we mimic that engraving on the back of the wristwatch. We try to harken back to all that stuff.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of respect for the past, and for each of your brands, you take that very seriously. I'm wondering how you balance that with moving your brands forward, finding new customers, and just kind of like being creative in the watch industry and doing new things, because we see a lot of I'm not gonna lie, I see a lot of vintage inspired watches, press releases for vintage inspired watches come through my email, and a lot of them kind of just look like old watches. And you can only get so far, making watches that just look like old watches. So how do you balance that respect for the past with finding new twists on it and moving forward? Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, for Zodiac, we do color.
Yeah.
As you might have noticed, but we've always done color. But the palettes within the group means that we can make it a bit more fun as well. So you can do watermelon, you can row on orange and green and blues, but color can only go so far before it just becomes a ton of just options for personalities, which is great, but you have to mix it up. So what we did this year, instead of saying, happy birthday Zodiac, let's do one watch of this color to say this is our anniversary, we kind of flexed in the most non-ego way. We wanted to show the capabilities of what the future could be. So we did titanium, and we've just released a ceramic watch today, and we've also just released a meteorite watch, which will come in 3 different variations. And we've kept it at a price point that's still befitting of Zodiac without trying to alienate the customers who are used to a certain level of price point. And I think that's really important. And at the same time as well, we've gone to about 70% of the collection that's now our movement, our in-house movement. We bought STP about 8 years ago, and it wasn't brilliant, and we've refined it, and it's a 3-hander, and that means that in the future that those movements can not just be time and date, but it can be even more, and again keeping it at the same price point. So aesthetics are one thing, and I said it with Worn and Wound a few months ago when I first started. They did the Saved by the Bell watch, which was brilliant, absolutely nuts. But like I told your team, I said what was great about it is it went very quickly, which is wonderful. Money's made. We've done the watch, people have got it, they're really happy. But it needs to have an evergreen story as well. And when you look within a watch, look within the hands, the numerals, the bezel, it should still be a Zodiac. So I'm a big believer, especially when we're getting this brand re-going, that if we have traditional Zodiac aesthetics, but don't take ourselves too seriously and try and push the envelope internally and material-wise, I think we'll keep it fresh.
Yeah, you certainly keep it fresh. Every new color combination, I think, like, how do they keep coming up with these color combinations? They're quite wild at times.
We'll keep going. We've seen what we're doing for 2023 as well, and that will be complications and looking to the past as well as color. So we like I said, we don't make many, and we've only made a few, like 40 or 82 in the past of certain colorways. And I had a guy just upstairs now and saying, can we bring this back? But we don't want to disrespect a limited edition or someone who has bought it, because if we did the Worn and Wound again because it was cool, those 182 people would feel a little let down. So we've also got to be quite precise about it, and if we do make reissues of what was quite cool, we have to still respect the fact that those guys and girls want to have something which is special just for them.
Yeah, I think another aspect to these, all these different color variations too, is it makes the watches inherently collectible.
Yeah.
I know that there are collectors in the audience who have probably bought multiple Zodiacs, different, different variations, and I mean that's part of the fun of collecting is having. Like seeing a different spin on the similar thing and collecting them and kind of like just like digging into the details of it. So.
And we've seen it for years with some of our favorite brands, with Omega with Speedmaster. The amount of variations of that, it's not boring. It's just retelling a story that is really important to that brand, and we're doing as well with Zodiac with the Super Seawolf, which was once the Seawolf. So it's good. It's very exciting, and I still think when we make so few, that every single person that will come to the desk, they are still learning something new as well.
Yep. So, Don, as far as that balance goes, your brand takes a slightly different approach.
One of the things I use a lot when I talk about our heritage, it gives us authority to do certain things. So we did it then, so we can do it again now, and it gives a certain different perspective on that decision-making thing. At the same time, when that watch was designed in the 40s, it was designed to fulfill certain criteria. We can take those criteria now and modernize them. So, for instance, with the M100, it's got a molded lume dial. That was originally, when it was designed to be luminous, but now we can really push that a lot further. Yeah. It doesn't change the aesthetic of the watch enormously, but it does change it enough that it modernizes it a lot. Mm-hmm. And so we get to do stuff like that. When we did the MP45, which is our monopusher, we developed a specific monopusher movement with Solita for that watch. And again, suddenly monopushers are everywhere. But at the time, it was new for them, and it was exciting for us to develop it with them. So we get to do stuff like that with the M60. It's again about pushing the boundaries, making it the very best we can make it, while still staying true to what we once were.
Yeah. Yeah, and RT, you just kind of spoke about this a little bit, before, like literally balancing the original watch from 100 years ago with something that's, that's new, a new case type that you developed. Can you talk a little bit about like the engineering aspect, of what you do, and because I feel like that's probably like the key to that balancing act that you
Yeah, so we you talked about making a very few watches, and I think you said 6,000.
Yes.
We make 400 watches a year, and so I feel small, but in comparison, it's also really fun because every single watch that we make is one of a kind, and so we get to have so much fun pairing the case with the dial and the strap, and basically. We look at each and every watch as though it's a piece of art.
Yeah.
It's a conversation piece. And obviously there's a lot of stories and conversations that can happen about the inside. But then with that engineering, we bought all of our own CNC machines. So now I have 3 vertical mills and 3 horizontal mills, lathes in the shop. And so we make almost everything on the case, on my wrist in Colorado. And because of that in-house capability, we can mix up the materials, mix up the designs. We can get better on the engineering every single day. And I mean, just 1% better every day is what we're after from an engineering standpoint.
Yeah.
And when we see a dial, some of the ones we have upstairs, they're either that true, antique white Grandview enamel from like Waltham, or, Hamilton in Illinois did some amazing Art Deco pieces with raised numerals. And when you see something like that and you can pair a bronze case with, to grab some of the bronze color in the dial and really tell that story authentically, it's still exciting every day when we see the new watch, and be able to show them off like pieces of art.
Yeah. It's really striking to look at your watches. If people haven't checked out a Vortic watch, like go up to the booth and like check out the watches and flip it over, because the movements really are, works of art that are 100 years old, and they're so well preserved, and you do such a great job of highlighting them. But what I love is that you see that movement that's 100 years old, and you see the dial that's 100 years old, and it's surrounded by this case that's like incredibly modern, and it's in the materials and it's aesthetic, it's a very like kind of angular case, and all this is by necessity, but it creates this very interesting kind of like dialogue that the watch is having with itself, almost like kind of like looking back a century ago, and then also into the future with the way it actually appears on the wrist.
Thank you. I like to call it a beautiful clash of old and new.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. So I wanted to ask you guys. I recently had the opportunity to talk to Jean-Claude Biver on a press trip for another brand, and I wanted to ask him about the vintage reissue trend, which isn't necessarily something that applies to what you guys do. But he said something interesting to me, and he said, "If you copy nostalgia, it's a sin. The future cannot be made with copies of the past," which I take as kind of a he's not a fan, let's say, of rehashing the past and vintage watches. And I would imagine you guys have a different perspective on that. There is a different perspective on that, and I'd love if you could respond to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Mike, if you want to kick it off.
Firstly, Jean-Claude Biver gave me some cheese once, and I loved it.
I did not get any cheese from Jean-Claude Biver.
That's my claim to fame.
So I don't rank. So.
When he speaks from perspective of passion, and he's seen all the big brands. He's gone through the reissues of so much, and what he did with Hublot, what he did with Tag Heuer and Zenith, and I completely see why he says that. He always wants to move those things forward. I think when you look at, especially a brand like Zodiac, it stalled. It came to a point where in the 70s and 80s that it couldn't. The people that owned it did not have that ability or the want or the need to even take it to the next level. So we have this ability to reintroduce something. Even though it's storied, it's old, it's special, it's been forgotten by some of our peers. And I think that's fair because we've got short memories. 40 years is a long time. Yeah. But for us right now, I don't think there's a sin within doing this to Zodiac or with Zodiac, because that story needs to be retold. And I think that when you look at something like this, which is as big or as bold as it might be, it's still telling a new story of something which is still quite traditional within what it is at its core. But I don't think it's blanketed for every brand. I think that for our brand, we need to do this. But I completely respect why he said it, especially with his history.
Yeah, sure. Don, any thoughts on
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a purely reflective brand. We're not all about just a history and nothing else. But at the same time, there's a certain clarity that comes with looking back at what used to be. And for instance, our M100 is a very pure interpretation of the Dirty Dozen watches. There are other manufacturers that have done homages to the Dirty Dozen watches that I think they've modernized too much. They've got a date on them, they've got a small second, it doesn't work as well as, or as feel as balanced as our watch. So I think you can take a lot of clarity from the past without having to be, you know, purely reflective. So yeah, that's only our perspective.
Yeah. RT, I know you must have a thought on this because, I mean, you're in some ways, you're literally, you know, reaching back into that nostalgic space.
Yeah, we don't sell watches, we sell nostalgia.
Yeah.
You know, we're telling stories of the past, and that's, I went to Disneyland actually last week, and, you know, if you apply this question to Walt Disney, like every single day, Disneyland and Disney World, they rinse and repeat. They copy what they did the last day. They copy what they've done years and years. They bring back and they reissue films and stories and characters. People love nostalgia.
Yeah.
And so how can we, all our brands, you know, tell those stories from the past that we do have short memories, right? And how do we harken back to that and tell people, especially young people that are just getting into watches, these amazing stories that happened a century, you know, ago. And that's what I feel like that we do, and we strive to do every day, is just tell those stories in a way that that people can really, really appreciate now.
Yeah.
We have a lot of military veterans, especially here in the US, who have worn our watches through service, and I think probably the same with Vertex as well. There is nothing better than keeping that story alive by telling maybe a new story, but an aesthetic that harks to the past. Because let's be honest, a lot of these watches that were bought and sold and worn during the 50s and 60s, the bracelets definitely didn't survive. The watches have definitely taken a beating. So why not retell it again? And I had a guy recently, he had a Seawolf from the 60s that was absolutely smashed up. But he didn't believe that the watch could go to 300 meters when he was a serviceman. He was a submariner. And he tied it to the side of his submarine. And I'm holding this in my hand. I'm like, what the hell has he done? But that needs to be retold. It needs to be redone.
Yeah. So I think that's a good kind of transition into the next topic I wanted to discuss, and that's how you guys interface with the collector community and the enthusiast community, and how that helps to tell the story of your brand and keep that heritage alive. And I wanted to ask if any of you, had any anecdotes or stories of, ways that, collectors of like vintage Zodiac, for example, might inform decisions going forward, or how you tell the story, tell that story going forward.
Vintage Zodiac wise, it's been it's a weird one actually. There's a really good forum, Vintage Zodiac, and they are incredible. But 20 years ago, when Fossil bought the brand, they did not like the direction of the brand, and they were thinking of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they just didn't want to know. And so it's been cut off until very recently, when we've reapproached them and let them see what we're doing for the future. And it's a very small, tight-knit group, but it was a good example of those people that, sports teams, or your favorite holiday destinations, or your favorite car brand. You love it because you believe in it. And if we can connect the old to the past, it will help everybody, new enthusiasts or not. But for me, I've always used social media to tell a story, even to a point if it's a negative story. I mean, we had a review with one of our peers, Teddy Baldassar, and one guy had a bad experience, and we know negativity can breed negativity, just like positivity. But I felt like I had to go in and answer a question. It was unfair, but also that guy needed an answer instead of just being throwing out to the void. And communication is a massive thing that we can do well at this small stage. I know that you look after people perfectly one-on-one if there's something wrong or good. And I think that's a great thing to do within this wind-up crowd, is that most of us either don't sell too much within retail, or if we do, we're making such a few amount of watches that we can have that personal touch. So red bars, meetups, a social media DM. We've got all this capability. We've just got to have consistency with it. And that's always been my mantra. I just want to ask questions. If it's wrong, I'll fix it. If I don't know how to, I'll try. But it's literally just old school, treat as you want to be treated. So.
Yep. Don, I imagine that you've encountered Vertex collectors or vintage watch collectors.
For sure. So I mean, firstly, loads and loads of people have Vertexes, which is lovely. Yeah. In fact, one of the guys yesterday, we were out with a drink with his mother passed away 2 weeks ago, and he found a little Vertex diary she had from 1949 in her stuff, which he was showing me, which is just lovely. So there's this sort of very palpable history that goes through it, but also the fact that we sell direct, we're not in retail, means that we know every single one of our customers personally.
Yeah.
And we go on this journey with them, and I know you'll feel the same way. Every watch you make is like a baby. It's like you feel very, very strongly that you want this watch to be good, and you want the experience the person has with the watch to be really good. So you get to build a very, very strong relationship with them. And I know a lot of them will have a heritage collection, or they'll have a heritage relationship with they'll know their grandfather served in the war, or in the services or something, and this brings them a little bit closer to them. So we're very much about nurturing that relationship and making sure everything's okay, and it's almost the most important thing to me.
Yeah, that's great. And RT, you must, again, just because of the nature of your brand, you must have all kinds of, powerful stories from, people who are bringing you, pocket watches that mean a great deal to them. Do you have any anecdotes that you can share with the with the audience about like a special moment that you might have had with a customer who brought you something really unique or interesting or meaningful?
Oh, yeah, too many to tell.
I'm sure.
But when you talk about collectors and collector groups and the passion, that they have, one thing that was really I guess surprising and extremely helpful to the preservation of our brand was during the Hamilton v. Vortic lawsuit. There was many Hamilton collectors, people who have collected every Hamilton pocket watches, wristwatches for years and years and years, that came to us and said how vital it was that we continue the fight and make sure we protect all the trademark law and everything around upcycling, and protect that we do, because we are telling the story of the Hamilton brand, the great American watch company that it was. This was made by Hamilton for the military, and so were a lot of our watches that say Hamilton on the dial, which unfortunately they didn't like, but
yeah, no,
it felt so good to have people that know so much about the history of Hamilton and feel so strongly about that brand choose our side. I'm sure other people chose another side, but that was really cool. And yeah, there are tons of customers that feel, it is like a baby, and you're exchanging this piece of history with them, and we have customers that actually send us gifts in return. So we had one customer that bought our military edition last year, and he sent me a propeller blade from the helicopter that he flew in Vietnam as a gift, and we have it framed in our conference room now. And obviously, we just made him a watch, but that in return is fantastic.
It's really important that he did that to you, and it's also important with all of us that we don't need a gift, but just a thank you that it meant something. So that is huge. I absolutely love that. And even today, one of my friends, he's a military guy, and he gave me a challenge coin, literally just because I treated him as we all want to treat somebody, and that brought me to a big lump in my throat. But it's a small thing, because these little things on our wrists are with us every single day. They mean something. And so if they can give something back to someone like Don, who owns the brand, or you bringing back these stories, or even myself, that's just a small part of a very big chain over there, it's important. And that's what you guys all do, and that's why we're all here today. So it's very important. That's great.
Yeah. That's great. Now the community is so important, and that's why Windup is so special, is because it brings people out to get together to talk about this this hobby that we all share. It's kind of a strange hobby that a lot of people don't understand, but more and more people are understanding. It's less of a niche, I think, every year that goes by. In that spirit, talking about the community, I want to open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions for the panel?
Crickets.
Now's your chance.
Blake.
It's for RT. You're looking at the movement that are years old with that thing. You notice that you just don't see on watches today. It can't be done, the art done, it can't be replicated with a machine. And everything you see in movement, wow, things don't make it like this.
Great question. And just for anyone that couldn't hear, the question was, what did these old pocket watch companies 100 years ago make that might be hard to recognize, or it doesn't get made today? And my first thought goes straight to enamel dials, the Grand Few enamel that was done. And I mean, Anordane is right above us, and they're one of the only ones that can do it. And I was reading all about their process, and that they use a similar process to what these companies did 100 years ago. But we had a conversation with one of their customers, and you're on a wait list. They can only make so many. It's a very slow process. It takes days to make one of these dials. Waltham Watch Company, in the late 1800s on the Charles River in Waltham, Massachusetts, it's still today called Watch City, made millions of Grand Few enamel dials. They pumped them out. I mean, just 1,000 a day in this factory. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to think about, is like, we could probably figure out, all of us, as the brands and resources that we have, we could probably figure out how to make one. We could do the raised numerals. We could hand apply all these amazing, beautiful things that they did back then. But how the hell 100 years ago did they make 10,000, 100,000 in like the year 1900, before these amazing CNC machines that I get to play with every day, before computers, before code? I have no idea. It blows my mind as an engineer every day. Making one, sure. Making 10,000, I don't know. Love that question.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Question for Michael. Hi. I've owned 3 Zodiacs. The first one is like the pale blue 53 model Seawolf. I think it was a 62 one.
Right.
And I think I paid 800. And I ended up selling it because it's kind of a little bit small, and it didn't keep the best time. And then I had a quartz Sea Dragon, a beautiful big honking thing with a white leather. Right. And then I had the pale blue replica. You have it up there. I had an earlier movement, the very stiff, kind of a clunky STP, and I think at the time it was only 700, when it was about 5 years ago. But I love the Seawolf, but for Zodiac, is there not the heritage? What about the future? Where is there anything with a totally new
movement?
The new thing coming?
So he's bought a vintage in the past. He's bought some of the early 2000 versions. He's also touched some of the Super Seawolves with some of the early STP movements, which didn't feel brilliant, but they were at a lower price point than they are today. And then, what's the future? Doing that and to feel what STP is now, the 1-11, is really good for me. It's all about materials on the inside of the movement. It was always an inexpensive way of kind of helping us get to where we want to be, but the price reflected it. And we start at $895 with our in-house movement, and nothing really goes over $1,695 with an in-house movement. But we do need to keep going. And what's quite lovely with STP, and this is with Fossil Group, and like anything in business, if you hit a certain moment or a number in business, they'll open the purse strings for innovation. And so next year we'll bring in a complication that we'll buy in. But why we'll buy it in is to keep that kind of continuation of growth. And as that's selling through, we will be making it in-house. And so all I will say is that I want to walk really strongly with this brand. The group as a whole do things globally. I will do it in America and the UK and a few different countries until we get it right, and then we can grow properly. But the movement has to be the stalwart, and then after that, it also has to be how we service it as well. And so we've got a 2-year warranty on it right now. I will hope that in the future, I'll change that to 5 years because of the strength and the power and the trust that I have in what STP will bring to the brand. So don't worry. I think we're doing it right. The price reflects it, but we don't want to go any higher. I think the price point's right where it is, but we just want to keep getting better. It's deserved of it. But thank you very much. Thanks for all the watches.
Do you have any other questions? I think we have one over here.
I'm loud enough, so you probably could hear me without this microphone.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you guys for doing what you do, because I know RT personally, and what he does is preserves history. And I like to see people are doing things other than an Apple Watch. No offense to Apple.
It's a good placeholder.
But no, it's history. It is a story. If you read, once you buy a watch from RT, you get a mini book about the history of the watch itself, and it's really important that we keep that history of watchmaking. So I'm not so much a question, but just want to thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Rep.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I think that's it. Thank you,
Thank
to
you.
our Panelists. Can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys having this discussion with us. It's been great. So, round of applause for our panelists. And enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.